Hey everyone, Temmi here. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the world of Terminus in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Now, because the game is still more than a year away from launch, we do have a lot of questions, we have a lot of gray areas, there are a lot of uncertainties, and there's a lot of vagueness. So because of that, this timeline, this preliminary history will be a little bit vague in some points. It's not meant to be overwhelmingly specific. I will probably redo this video a little bit later when we fill in some of these questions and some of these gray areas. For now, this is meant to be an overview, and I will try to keep it as speculation-free as possible. If I do have a thought or a speculation, I'll try to disclaimer and say, by the way, guys, this really isn't written. This is just kind of what I think, my theories on this particular topic. So with all that being said, let's jump right in. The current year in Terminus is 987, or rather I should say that will be the current year when the game launches. 987 IH, which stands for Ithosbrin Higelen. We don't have any official pronunciation of that, so I'm waiting for them to tell me that I've pronounced it completely wrong. Now, this new calendar begins with the exodus of the ancient dragons, who inhabited the world long before any of the current playable races were there. So let's talk a little bit about that period. And this age is called the Before. We're not really given a specific title for this period. Some people call it Before the Ages, Before the Eras of Collision, the Land Before Time. Just call it whatever you'd like. I stick with the Before, nice and simple and easy to work with. Now, in the Before, the world was originally called Nistarak. It was inhabited largely by the ancient dragons, though there were a few other native races that we'll get into a little bit later. The ancient dragons came in two sects, of course. The rival Reen, the dragons of the sky, and the Solcromain, the dragons of the sea. And they're caught in this eternal war for dominance which neither side can ever win, until we have Rocknil Thamos, who leads the rival Reen in victory over the Solcromain in a war of epic dragony proportions. Following this, he actually kills his father, who was the king of the rival Reen, and therefore becomes the king of both the dragons of the sky and the dragons of the sea. It is unknown why, but shortly after this and shortly before the first era of collision, all of the dragons leave. And we don't know exactly what leave means. We don't know if they perished or if they chose to go to a different planet or went just to a different plane on the planet. We don't know. This is one of the big questions that we're left with. Why did the dragons leave and where did they go? Now, we do know that not all of them left. We have a few that still are on Terminus, sleeping, or some of them aren't sleeping, but we do know that the vast majority of them left. And we also don't know if this caused the eras of collision, or if maybe the dragons knew it was coming and so they left before the eras of collision. We don't know all that. All we know is that the dragons left. When the dragons left, the Tholen of Itholis created our new calendar, this IH, Ithosbrin Higelen. In conjunction with the dragons leaving, we are given the Dragon Accord. Now, we don't know if the dragons created this, or maybe they were preventing it from being created with their presence. This is again, one of those mysteries that we don't know. But when they left, we were given the Dragon Accord, also known as the Celestial Boundary. We don't know too much about what it is either, but we do have a little bit of information because there are two characters that we will get into later. They will probably have their own video because they deserve their own video. But they start to unravel a little bit about this celestial boundary, and their thoughts are that it was written by the dragons, not confirmed, and that it is a boundary between the realm of the immortal and the mortal. Literally a boundary between the celestials, the gods, the pantheons, and the mortals of Terminus. Now, before we get too deeply into the first era of collision, I just want to touch on what these eras are. Now, they're not eras in a typical sense, where it's this really long period of hundreds or perhaps even thousands of years. The eras of collision are actually just really brief little points in history where several races are brought to Terminus. The ages are what I would typically think of an era or like a period would be. The ages are the really long spans of time where there's a lot of development and a lot of change and a lot of just everything else. The eras of collision are just really brief points in time where different races are brought in. The first era of collision begins more or less with the arrival of the Dwarves of Uldasa in the year 7 IH. Uldasa was their home planet. All of these races were somewhere else before they came to Terminus. They established a capital of Kadasa, which means Kazis Reach, in honor of their deity Kazis, on the continent of White Thaw. In the year 9 IH, the elves of Seolane arrive. When they arrived on Terminus, they replanted the seed of their previously destroyed Lucent tree in Fairthal, or what they would call Fairthal later. In the year 12 IH, the Ogres of Gorak arrive. Now, this deserves a moment of our time because they are the first group that acknowledges the fact that the laws on their homeworld and on Terminus are different, vastly different. On Gorak, there were 6 clans of ogres, and they each had a tome of war. And there was this interesting mythos about these tomes of war that within them held the secrets to unknowable power, but also within them held their own destruction. So it was this catch-22 where they could never gather them, they never wanted to open them, but they had to have them. Now, when they arrive on Terminus, Rothuk, clan lord of the Black Moon Ogres, decides to test and see if he can now learn the secrets of his Tome of War. And he does. He subsequently, quote, unites, unquote, the different ogre clans in Broken Maw. However, he does lose his sanity and later abdicates and disappears. Thus ends the first era of collision. The Age of Seclusion begins in the year 28 IH. The Ogres, a naturally warlike race, devolve into a series of battles with the Wo-Chi, a race native to Terminus. The Elves, meanwhile, cultivate their Lucent tree, and they spell the first 3 seals of their 7-sided door. Unfortunately, we don't have much more information about the Wo-Chi nor the 7-sided door, so there isn't much detail to go into. The Dwarven God Razzaq the Rageful realizes the same thing that Rothuk of the Ogres realized years before. He's no longer bound by the same ancient laws that were found on Uldasa, his home planet. He tries to devour the Dwarven race, but Lockenhammer, the Dwarven godhead, quickly realizes this and strips Razzaq of his powers and imprisons him within the tenebrous tundra. Kazis, seeing the dissension of his brother Razzaq, makes the choice to descend and gives up his immortality to become a high mortal. He chooses this so that he may reign over the dwarves, his own personal creation, and he teaches them how to forge cold dark steel. There's a bit of confusion surrounding the second era of collision, since it does not bring to us a playable race, unlike the other 3. However, the second era of collision brings to us the Ginto, who play such an important role in the history of Terminus they cannot be forgotten. The Ginto come to Terminus in the year 450 IH. Upon their arrival, the husband king of the Ginto, Itero, is suffering from a mortal wound brought on by the eyeless eclipse, which, due to vague phrasing, could either be a catastrophe that was already occurring on their home planet, or could be the power of Terminus that plucked them from their home planets. Unknown. Regardless, Janavi, the bride queen of the Ginto, sees Itero's illness and attempts to descend his body so that he may recover. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Not only does his sickness get worse, it becomes a madness which begins to infect the Ginto people, creating a warlike cult called the Revenants. Janavi sees this corruption and descends herself, sacrificing body and essence to bestow the remaining untainted Ginto with a pureness that creates the Remnant. The Revenant fall upon the Remnant in what would soon be called the Deicide War. Due to his legitimate injuries by the eyeless eclipse, the Revenant Lord, once known as Itero, suffers initial defeat, and in the year 455 IH, he retreats to beneath Mount Holthir. The Age of Chaos begins with the third era of collision. In the year 458 IH, the Mur of Isul and the Archai of Roa arrive in such close proximity that debating who came first is pointless. Now, Now the Mer quickly find that they cannot breathe the native waters of Terminus. Neithir, a Mer deity, gives up his life to create a safe bubble haven underwater which the Mer can live in safely. However, the native waters of Terminus quickly barge in and corrupt this safe water. And Sirenai, the Mer goddess of beauty, uses her power to alter the Mer form to be able to survive, giving them proper organs and whatever they may need. Now the Neithirian Red, believing this a violation of their very bodies, are enraged, and they slay their own goddess, and then descend into the depths. Upon the death of their two deities, the Mer become known as the Dark Mer. The Archai peacefully settle on the island of Su-Roa, or Small Roa, in honor of their home planet. The humans arrive from Vast Demeth in the year 459 IH. Luckily, they land close enough to the elves of Faerthal that they can take refuge with them through a winter so cold and inhospitable that it was called the Cursed Frost. In the spring, King Amensol founded the human capital of Havensong, and the Crown Prince Avendir is born. The year 470 IH would later be called the Year of Outbreak. The Revenant emerge from their hiding place beneath Mount Holthir, and they overwhelm the nearby remnant at Olam's Hill, renaming it Baka Ern. The Ravaging Lord sets his sights on Terminus at large. Osari of the human Pantheon and Haethys Kevgrejel of the Archai Pantheon fall to Etero's seductions, and they descend to high mortal status so that they may serve him in the Deicide War. The next several years feature several different civilizations and outposts falling to the Revenant, or worse, joining them. In the year 473 IH, the Ravaging Lord splits his army into 3 pieces, so that he may assault each continent simultaneously. Osari would lead the assault on the continent of Kingsreach, Haethys Kevgrejel would attack out of the snows of Whitethaw, and the Ravaging Lord himself would strike upon Rainfall, though it was not yet called this. In the year 475 IH, a secret summit is held on the hidden island of Vesu, where there are representatives from each of the 6 sentient races. They make the decision to undertake the Sanctum Edict. This edict states that a huge structure called a sanctum would be built upon each continent, such that the races inhabiting each continent would hide there until the threat of the Ravaging Lord was diminished. In the year 481 IH, the Deicide War comes fully of age. Haethys Kevgrejel destroys the snowstorms hiding the sanctum upon Whitethaw, and the Archai dwarves are forced to retreat within. King Amensol is killed during the siege of Havensong, and Osari, the traitor god, orders every stone of the city dropped into the sea. The elves and humans retreat to their sanctum. Though the Dark Mer and the Ogres initially find some small amount of victory, they eventually also retreat to their burning sanctum. The year 484 marks the arrival of 6 godly beings that come to the land with the intent to fight the Ravaging Lord. Little enough is known about these 6, their powers, their origins, even their names, though they do come to be known as war wizards. Haethys Kevgrejel is forced to retreat, and Osari is slain upon the ruins of Havensong. Some say that he was simply preparing his own grave with his treatment of the city. The Ravaging Lord and the rest of his forces retreat to Mount Cadrahor in the north of Rainfall. The young new king of humans, Avendir, and the high mortal dwarven Kazis lead the armies of the 6 upon the Ravaging Lord. 2 of the 6 war wizards are separated from the group and choose to continue and move directly upon the Ravaging Lord, 2 versus 1. The Ravaging Lord slays one of the war wizards and severely injures another. It is at this moment that Rai Kafiros bursts from beneath Mount Cadrahor, as that is her realm to hold dominion over. No sooner than she bursts forth than she is impaled upon the very pillar Ka by the Ravaging Lord. The dragon blood spilled heralds the appearance of Rock Nilthamos, and he crushes the Ravaging Lord with hardly an effort. Maw gaping open, ready to breathe fire and destruction upon armies of Revenant and 6 alike, a foreign creature appears, and he says, "Blood for blood, king. There is no breach." The dragon and the foreign creature disappear. The Deicide War ends. The Frail Age begins in the year 486 IH. The dignitaries of the 6 races reconvene on the island of Vesu. The Dark Mer standard is absent. The Ogre post stands, though their herald is absent. And thus, the pact has been broken. The fourth era of collision begins in the year 620 IH. The halflings of Hiraeth arrive, and they found Wild's End on King's Reach. In the year 621 IH, the Scar of Deshoth arrive, and they found Scargol on Rainfall. In the year 622, the gnomes of Stormona arrive in their floating fortress of Skyhold, which situates itself near Whitethaw. Also in the year 622 IH, Terminus is left with two voids. The first, the Void of Mercy, is that the remaining war wizards leave the land. For surely if they had stayed, they would have been kings, demigods, or worse. The second void is that of Lament. The Dragon Accord, also known as the Celestial Boundary, is strengthened. Though we don't know exactly what this means, the speculation, disclaimer, is that this means it will be much harder for gods to communicate with the mortals, as we saw so much during the Deicide War with the dissension of Razzaq and Kazis, and then Itero and Gnavi, and everything that started the war in the first place. And then that leads us back to the year 987 IH.